Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Bubble podcast. As you guys know, we're getting knee deep into AI, and we're of the opinion that obviously the narrative around AI is great, but it's also very, very bubbly and it might pop at any given moment. But as I've always mentioned, I think the underlying technology is absolutely phenomenal. I think there is, what we're the changes that we're going to see in our society, in our economy, are going to be so foundational that it might completely change the way that we do a lot of things, particularly in business as well. Obviously, what matters there now is what are some of these people who are doing the unsexy, more productive, more powerful work, but work that can actually make that long-term impact, even if that might not sound like something, oh, as if this new tool is going to completely destroy Hollywood, sort of a deal. One of those folks here is this gentleman who co-founded Clario, which is a tool. Personally, I was a data analyst by profession. I worked a couple of years at Teradata, which was a sort of legacy, ETL, data integration, intelligence company. So I know how powerful, how huge this industry is. One of the problems that we used to face at the time was that we were all about structured data. Unstructured data was our kryptonite. We hated people who would have these tons and tons of data lakes full of all this crappy unstructured data. And
Yeah.
yet now in the age of AI, it is, data is everywhere. It is being created everywhere. It is being processed everywhere. And it is not only, there is definitely a possibility of taking all of that data and working on it, but it is obviously costly as well. We're talking a lot about token costs these days. And this particular gentleman has a very, very exciting startup that not only, classifies your data, structures it, cleans it, but also saves a lot of your token costs, particularly for enterprises who are knee deep, very, very into AI, but the cost is killing them. Today with us, we have Yousuf Khan, who is the co-founder of Clario, and I believe also the CEO running the ship over there. Yousuf, thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us.
Thank you for making time. We've built a phenomenal platform, and the kind of industry requires forums and conversations like this. And so, really grateful to you for being able to sort of drive that train and keep a lot of activity, and founders like myself being able to be given a voice. So, thank you for making time, and thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Yusuf, I'm going to just start off trying to get a bit of background of what you've been up to. My understanding is you were in the investing space just a little while ago. So, what actually brings you from that space to building a startup right now? What's your near past background? And tell me a bit
Yeah,
about Clario. I,
yeah.
I gave a bit of an intro. I just want you to, you
I
know,
appreciate that. Thank you. Actually, you're wearing our corporate colors, so we'll probably do a blog post with you eventually as well. So thank you
perfect,
very much for
perfect.
that. No, so just a little bit of background. I'm just a kid from Karachi who's trying to make it in the world. So I was born in Pakistan. I grew up all over the world, from countries like Egypt to Nairobi, Kenya, and the UK for several years, and then moved to San Francisco Bay Area just over a decade ago. And for a large part of my career, I was an operator as a CIO, overseeing IT, and also as an interim CISO at multiple companies. And so my responsibility has really been to be able to drive technology transformation at multiple companies, but largely overseeing IT and security teams, combination of business applications, data platforms, driving a number of initiatives, and was part of the executive teams at companies like Qualys and Pure Storage, from 600 employees to about 4,000, and an IPO, and then worked at early stage company called MoveWorks, which was recently acquired by ServiceNow, and then had a brief stint as CIO at Automation Anywhere. And then prior to founding Clario with my co-founder Madhuvora, who's CTO of the company, I was a venture investor as a general partner at a Silicon Valley VC firm called Ridge Ventures, where invested in early stage enterprise and AI companies, typically at seed and Series A. And then last year, I made the decision that it's a very exciting time in the industry. I have a vast network of CIOs. I was a CIO, of course, and understand IT organizations very, very well. And in all of my research, I discovered that the failure of AI projects happening in enterprises was caused by a number of reasons. And one of those reasons was data. And when I started to look into this, I thought to myself, if I was a CIO in 2026 and my CEO and my executive team, my board had said, we need to drive more AI, where would I fail? And I've tried to solve the problem that Clario is solving over the course of 15 years as a CIO. And so I discovered that the only way to try and solve this is to literally try and do it myself. And that resulted in my decision in co-founding a company. And here we are.
That makes sense. I just want to quickly understand, when did you join, formal workforce back in the day, right after university? What year was that?
Oh, it was even before that, actually. So my first job, for what it's worth, was selling chocolates, imported chocolates at school when I was 13 years old. I think the job I did prior to that was being my dad's assistant after school, showing up at his office and filing papers. So I've been working for as long as I can remember, and I've worked in all sorts of jobs. But I remember I've worked I had three jobs whilst I was at college, paying for college tuition at King's College. One was being working in a video rental store, when videotapes and rental. For those who don't know about that, it's a piece of equipment that's where tapes, and that's how this was pre Netflix. So I have to remind people what this is. Sometimes it's astounding from a generational standpoint. I worked for an import-export company to understand trading. I've helped manage a theater and an event conference venue. I've ripped out chewing gum from carpet floors. Run a bar, even though I don't drink. So I think they trusted me to do that. So I've had long experience. My first career in tech was working for an internet startup in my second year of college. It was in '99, and it was a company that just got funded. It was the first time I'd heard of the term venture capital. The internet was all the rage, and this company wanted somebody to help them move boxes into their office for a day. So that's all and I showed up, and I was like, what is this place? Why are people so happy? And what's going on here? And then I heard the term venture capital. I heard that this company was only 6 months old or a year old or something like that. And all of a sudden there were 200 people. And I said, how does this happen? This is magic. And why are you people so happy? I'd like to be part of this. And that got me going as a career in tech. And so, and then I just kept one day turned into a week, 1 week turned into an entire summer, and then I had a full-time contract to join as an IT project manager, ultimately. So I've worked in IT and technology for the longest time.
Makes sense. So it's fascinating because your career in IT sort of was like an accident. Your education was
I'm
in
the accidental CIO. I say this as the subject of my blog post. So you're absolutely right. I've accidentally landed into this. I don't know how, but here I am. Yeah.
and it also coincided with the sort of peak of the market, right? So 99 you joined, 2000 mid 2000 was when that sort of position ended according to the your LinkedIn. I'm curious, were you at the level that you were exposed to this sort of pump and dump that happened at the turn of the tide for that particular technological revolution? And the reason why I mentioned that is because a lot of people are now, comparing what's happening with AI with what sort of happened with the internet, early days of internet, right? And uh, contextually, it's very easy to explain the difference between how Wall Street views a certain technology and how actually that technology functions and then creates value over time. Because right now there are two extreme positions. Either AI is so amazing, it's going to change the world and make everybody job free and full of prosperity, or it is going to be dystopian and it is going to make everybody jobless. When the truth might be somewhere in the middle. And I'm curious to understand if there is
Yes.
any correlation to the sentiment as to what you experienced in the first 5 years of your career.
It's a very, very good question in terms of parallel. I like the way you framed that, actually. So there is similarity. So
Mm.
let's talk about similarities. Are we in a bubble? 100% we're in a bubble. I think the difference now is this has been a much longer bubble than the previous one on internet. Second, is there was that when that bubble burst, it was really, really detrimental for an entire industry. It literally, the stories I heard before I moved to Silicon Valley about how bad it was and how drastic it was real. And but in this case, I just believe that it is a much bigger industry. It's a much faster industry. It's a much richer industry as a general rule. And I think it's a more exciting industry. So I think the risk could be adequately managed. Do I think that there is a valuation inflation in a bunch of areas? Yes, I do. I think there's plenty of that. But I think that's been the case in any market momentum in a specific industry, whether it was crypto or other areas in some way, shape, or form. So I think the beauty of the free market is that it is a free market, that ultimately equilibrium starts to bring some correction because of forces that sort of come into place. The exception to that has been the 2008 financial crisis, when the government had to step in at a national and then a global level with its checkbook. And so, heaven forbid we come into that situation ever again. I don't wish that on for us or any country for that matter. But what I will say is, I think it's somewhere in between when it comes to the impact on jobs in others. So what we're seeing in AI definitively is that there are some the it's not about the jobs being lost, it's about how much the job is being changed.
Mm.
And at the very foundational level, that is a productivity uplift. Your ability to be able to, create written content, edit it, then be able to distribute it is a lot faster than it ever was before. So the problem that we look to solve is ultimately around unstructured data. So the volume of unstructured data is exploding at a rapid pace, and part of that is being generated by AI. So I think that's one happening. I think the innovations my hope and my optimistic view is the volume of innovation will kind of counter any major detrimental effect. And the reason for that, the way I see it, is new industries are being formed, and existing industries which have been very nascent from a technological standpoint are being completely up leveled as well as a result of AI. If you look at legal tech hasn't really been a thing for
Mm.
up until maybe 5+ years ago, when now you're seeing multi-billion-dollar unicorns and entire industries, and an industry which has been there for centuries, now literally absorbing AI, taking it as a way to be able to up level and to be able to drive it. Do I think the use of AI in medical research will benefit society? 100%. Does that mean
Mm.
that we will have a healthier workforce? That's my hope, of course. So I see that. And then, of course, you have entirely new industries where, whether it's services or consumer or financial services, new products are being created. And as a result, that will create economic opportunity. That's the optimistic piece. On the other aspect, then yes, there are a bunch of operational jobs because of the nature of how improved the AI gets every single day with the LM models. It's breathtaking to see. And what that means is that initially it will start with 5 or 10% of your job, then it will go to 20%, and then it will get to 30 or 40%, and sometimes more. And so if you think about the operational jobs which require analysis, ultimately that it starts to become automated or threatened in some way, shape, or form. I still believe that there's a huge window of opportunity. I think there will be correction. I think I'm just a believer in moderation. Everything. I think too much of anything is not good for anybody. I think there's a bubble. Do I think there's a lot of companies trying to do things where the promise won't be real? Yeah, I mean, that's unfortunately a part of the startup ecosystem. We tend to see that. So I think it will level out. I tend to be more optimistic, simply because, having seen the technology, I think this is a generational shift, and very different to where it was in 2008.
No, that makes sense. I think I actually read a couple of interesting pieces recently that one of them spoke about, as a VC, that gentleman was saying, why I'm rooting for a crash. Considering, obviously most people who have money on the line don't necessarily want a crash right now. They
Well, I
want
think
their
I,
exit.
I don't know who that was, but I will tell you they're probably doing it because they have a short position on something. So,
but
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 I'm
his thesis was, his entire thesis was, he was talking about how crashes are like, nature's way of seeking
yeah.
efficiency. Crashes are
Mhm.
nature's way of ensuring that it rewards those who are doing genuinely foundational work in the grand scheme of things. Because when there is a bubble, more often than not, then the Ponzi's and the Frankensteins of any industry sort of start to grow, right? The cancers, if you may call it. If you want to
Yeah.
truly find value, then you have to be conservative, fiscally and otherwise, and crashes tend to do that. So there was that piece. Then there was another piece that was correlating, what's happening with AI and robotics. And to be fair, it's a range of industries now that are certainly very exciting again. I feel like the last 20 years were very standard. You had these big seven tech players. Anyone who would even pop up would be acquired by them, and it was nice financially, but it was boring. And
Yeah.
I feel like my young self who was 20 years ago was exciting because every day there was a new technology coming out, right? There were in that time lots of new industries. But the other piece said every time over the last 150 years during multiple sort of industrial revolutions, steam engine and railway and so on and so forth, bubbles have always formed. It's a necessary way of how society responds to things. And they sort of talked about a dip and a rise, right? So whenever such technologies come in, financially and even with jobs, there's always a dip because the first major layer of workforce, whether that was people riding on horses, driving carriages, so on and so forth, typewriters for that matter, are always the first one to get disrupted, and that layer gets automated, and there is a lot of value generated. Then there is a transition time of reskilling and repositioning that talent into this new world where every person is able to achieve 10x productivity or whatever. And that's when the society truly begins to benefit from that particular technology. Now, all of this background in the reason why I gave it was I want to get a sense of you with your VC hat on. VCs are strategists. They generally have a thesis, and they're betting on that thesis day in day out, right? There is one thing of what the public gets to hear, and then there is a lot of other things that the VC that's going on in the VC's mind, or what's happening really in closed doors behind in Silicon Valley. A lot of VCs, I would argue right now, would be very conservative. They'd be like, "This is a bubble. We don't know where this goes." Going out there, setting up a startup, raising that funds, considering that you might have in your thesis the idea you can raise money right now, but that the model of the last 20 years may not be the model of the next 10 years, right? You may have to be a lot more conservative. You may have to be a lot more nifty. And it's not going to be as sexy as it's been the last 10 years. What was going on in your mind? What was that thesis with you, particularly coming into this space? And when you're looking at your startup, I'm going to talk about the technicals of it in just a
Sure.
little bit,
Sure.
but I want to get a sense
Yeah.
of the financial, the business side of raising, doing this, having a projection of where this might go, and actually genuinely being conservative in making sure that you actually sustain during this
Yeah.
turbulent dip in a rise.
Yeah. So I'll say a few things. So look, I think fun is yes. As the VC industry has grown, I was a general partner at Ridge Ventures for 5+ years. One thing that stood out for me is I think what does work in the industry is level of focus. Focus in investing in a particular area, particular industries, set of type of businesses, building a thesis. I do think being narrow in understanding and being having a depth of domain intelligence actually resonates both with founders who get your business right, as well as with LPs who invest that fund, who because you built a thesis based on deep level of research. The second part, which every VC will admit to, is there's a lot of fundamental luck in this business. It's the nature of it, right? It's the and but the thing that really counts is the level of relationships and what you're able to build in terms of credibility and strategy. So to your points, the strategy ultimately is not just about, well, we want to invest in this area. It's about how that strategy gets put to work. How are you going to be able to connect into the right founders? How are you able to sort of get into the right level of deals to be able to get those positions, basically? So I think that's a large part of how it's done. Now, in terms of your question about, well, how do you think about whether they're conservative or not? I think some of the best investors are the ones who are most patient. I think venture, as a general rule, is one where you have to have a longer term horizon. Most companies, I was lucky to be part of a company called Pure Storage, where I joined them in 2015, and they went public in 2015, but only after like 7 or 8 years after formation. So the fact that they were able to do that, I don't think many companies have been able to. That is not the norm. Like now, companies are staying private for a lot longer, but also the bar to going public is definitively a lot higher. But you see a lot of the M&As that are typically happening. But so, as a general rule, if you are a venture investor, you have got to invest with a longer term horizon. And that's factored in terms of how a VC fund is typically structured. When you think about being conservative, I think that comes down to just being focused more than it is anything else. I think you will get excited about a particular company or a particular industry, and you will do whatever you can to be able to make sure you can get an investment into that company. Based on the fact that you built a thesis on it and you earn the right. I think most people forget you have to earn the right to invest in a company. It's not something that just comes up and you're like, okay, let me just invest. Like you have to. A founder like now myself wants to be able to. If I want to give up a certain level of equity and raise a certain capital, I have that's limited. It's not unlimited. Not everybody. So VCs have to ultimately be able to earn the right to be able to invest. And I think in some cases, yes, some VCs are going to shy away because they believe that certain areas are inflated or overvalued or don't see a large return. Sometimes it's just as simple as I don't see a sizable venture return happening in this market. That's okay. Just because it's a good product doesn't mean it's a good venture backable idea that should be invested by a VC. That doesn't mean to say that it's not a good idea or a good product or even a good company. It's just not the best model for a VC industry, for example. So, yeah, and an example is this AI consulting services. Wouldn't you be wonderful to be an AI consultant, he says? But that's not a typical venture backable company because it's services. The margins are different. Type differentiation is not there. It's difficult to. Are we seeing now AI powered like tech enabled services? So there's a next. It's morphing into something that could be venture backed, whether it's roll ups that are basically being done or AI powered services. So the industry is morphing. So I think the conservative is the one that shows up in saying we have a thesis, we're going to stick to this focus, and we're not going to get distracted from it. And the good news is it's such a big industry now. It is so much more exciting because of the avenues that have been created with AI across all of these industries, from restaurant tech to property tech to fintech, and then enterprise software, and then verticals. I mean, it's so. I think it's a great opportunity to build a company. It's a great time to build a company. I think the capital is there. I think the imagination is there. The structures is there, and we're operating in a global market. And so, from that standpoint, I remain optimistic about what can and cannot be done. But at the same time, with every market bubble, there's always going to be a few things that are just not going to work, and that's just a natural part of it. And I don't shy away from it.
That makes sense. What's your core thesis here in terms of what Clario does? What's the problem, and
It's yeah.
why do you think that that needs a solution now? Like, what got you started?
I mean, I'll just be blunt and honest. The bottom line is the world is just being the volume of garbage data that's being created in across enterprises and companies is absolutely ridiculous. To be perfectly honest, I find it offensive because I can't believe how much is being wasted. So to give you some context, I've been trying to solve this problem for 15 years, Muzamil, right? Like I was a CIO of several companies, and all I would try to do is to try and say, answer some basic questions. Can I clean my file system? Right. For example, you probably don't clean the photos on your phone, right? You're visual first individual. You're on in the that's fine. But with the greatest of respect, there's a bunch of stuff that you probably should be deleted. It probably
Yes,
doesn't volume. It doesn't
100%.
need to be. It
My
doesn't need
my
to be backed up. It
Apple
doesn't need to
Cloud
be
cost
archived.
is growing. I have 3 terabytes of content that I need. I
Thank
don't
you.
need it.
Right. I know you don't need it, dude. I've been paying for a subscription on another cloud file system for 15 years. I don't even know what the hell's in there. Okay. But it's ridiculous for enterprises. And the reason I basically thought about this is I've been trying to solve this problem 15 years, initially way before AI, just clean infrastructure. This is not rocket science. This is like, can you find the files that are over 10 years old that nobody has touched? I mean, it's not that hard, right? Guess what? I couldn't get an answer to that question, right? Then I said, could you just show me the files that have been duplicated 15 times over from 7 years ago. Can't answer that question. Think about how much stuff it just adds up. The file name, version underscore 26 underscore Muzamil underscore final underscore do not change underscore final. What's going on, man? What is this? Right? It's ridiculous. Like, get a hold of this situation. This was the genesis of the problem. I mean, I was joking. I was going to call this company garbage.ai, but none of the investors want to invest in a company called garbage.ai. I then tried to call it Katra.ai, and none of the Desi VCs wanted to invest in a company called Katra.ai. So I had to call it Clario, which is Clarity of Infrastructure and Operations, Clario. So the genesis of the problem is, can we clean a file system and a content system? The reason you want to clean a content system is because you want to build a conversational AI project, for example, for customer service or automating an engineering project based on Confluence articles, right? But a garbage in is garbage out. So, for example, if somebody talks to an agent or a bot and says, I would like to set up email on my phone, and the article shows up, please set it up on your BlackBerry phone because the article hasn't been updated in the knowledge base from 2008. Like, so now you've spent
Yeah.
token costs,
Yeah.
right? Now you've got people who use that bot or agent who don't trust it, so they won't use it again. And now you've got this problem just becomes a
And
bigger problem.
they're gonna blame the AI because they're gonna be like, oh, it's hallucinating, it's terrible. But the
They're going
fact
to
is,
blame me as a CIO, dude. That's going to
yeah.
happen. They're going to call me up and they say, "What the hell's going on here? This company, you told us you're going to build an AI project and roll it out across the company, and it fell apart." So that's what's going to happen, right? And in customer service projects, it's going to be speak to an agent. The point is very simple. Unstructured data is 80% of a company's file system, first and foremost, okay, or a content system. Number two, they are generating more unstructured data than ever before. So if you and I wanted to create a document pre-ChatGPT, we would probably wait for about a week to basically do it. In fact, we would avoid having to write a document because it would be so hard and cumbersome. File, new, here it is, type it up, go back, have a cup of coffee, come back, etc. Now you go to ChatGPT, you go to Claude, and you say, give me a 20-page document about the wonderful podcast that Muzamil has created. Put some photos in there and tell me it will create it in 5 minutes. Now, imagine that millions of those types of content being created in companies, being uploaded into Google Drives and Microsoft SharePoint articles and Confluence and Microsoft OneDrives and Box folders. And then the impact of that in the longer term. Number one, when you want to search for content in a company, what are you going to see? You're going to see garbage. Yes or no? Second, you're going to now say, I would like to do an AI project internally. So let's take a simple case, right? If you were CEO of a company, Muzamil, and you wanted to automate new hire onboarding because you don't want to hire any people ops people or HR people to start with, you say, if you're a new employee of my company, talk to this bot that's going to help you with all the questions. If your documents are from 2020, it's going to bring up COVID vaccination requirements, isn't it? Because you didn't clean it up. If you are going to automate a legal process, if you put in 20 versions of a document like an NDA, it's going to bring up conditions and it's going to bring up, wrong answers for stuff, and you're never going to use it again. What have you done in the process? You've now had another failed AI project. You now spent thousands of dollars on token costs. And the reason that token cost becomes a problem is because when you put garbage into trying to do an AI project, retrieval becomes noisy. You're able to process. Think about you cleaning a house, right? If you knew that 2 rooms in your house were dirty, but you still tried to sort of clean them, a waste of time, waste of money, waste of resources, waste of energy. That's what's happening with garbage data. That's sort of coming into place. So our goal is very simple. We're the Marie Kondo of enterprise data. We want to spark joy in file systems and content systems all over the world. We integrate with OneDrive, Google Drive, Confluence, Box, SharePoint. We understand these file and content systems inside out. We scan for the metadata in the file system. We're able to understand how you can clean it. We'll be able to batch a whole bunch of recommendations in terms of actions that you want to take, and then be able to sort of clean that up, and you can have a much cleaner infrastructure and a better AI outcome. That's the way we think, but that's what we're basically doing. So that's what Clario does, and that's the genesis. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious. On one end, I understand the whole. There's a lot of garbage. There's a lot of redundancy. There's a lot of obsolete data, and you want to clean that up, archive it if you must, delete it if you must. But then there is the whole concept of, I mean, you're dealing with unstructured data now.
Yeah.
I'm curious whether, because right now, you're particularly the idea that you can create so much data from these LLMs, which everybody is doing. Personally, I'm doing as well. You know, I come up with a thought, I made 20-page documents, I come back, it's probably 3 pages down. So I'm like, okay, let's do it again. So now
Of
I
course,
create 40
reprompt.
documents.
Go ahead. Yeah, totally. Yeah, why not?
And a lot of this content is now being created. A lot of, on enterprise is going to be at scale. Um, but then there's a lot of useful content being created as well. There's also unstructured and random and
Sure,
all of the place, right?
sure.
Technically speaking, once you're actually in and you are in the infrastructure and in this position of dealing with a lot of this unstructured data, I'm curious if the eventuality also includes you being able to provide consistency to this unstructured data, because a lot of, let's say, in my understanding, the next generation of AI is also going to require you being able to utilize your unstructured data and generate insights from that, and to potentially make your AI better. Um, Palantir came out with this thing yesterday about sovereign AI and how you shouldn't be putting your data out to these frontier models and build your own sort of XYZ. So I'm curious whether this is just about removing redundancies, or whether on some level this also optimizes your entire unstructured data lake, if you must call it, and position it for better utilization and insight generation for the future as well.
Great question. Let me just be more foundational about this. You need to clean your system.
Mm,
You need to clean the system first. It's as simple and straightforward as that. Okay. So let me give you some examples. We have discovered terabytes of Access database files being shared on OneDrive. Can you open up Access database anymore? No, it's not. It's an unsupported file format. Okay. There's literally volumes of this, not just being stored, it's being backed up and archived. So, unsupported file formats shouldn't show up in search results, shouldn't be backed up, shouldn't be archived. Now, let's move to content. Does it make sense for your automation of customer service agents or an internal engineering automation to have to be created with knowledge articles that belong to a product you no longer sell or you no longer support? Does that make any sense at all?
mm,
No. So why do those articles still exist? For what? For some historical case? If it is, then move it out of the system.
mm,
That's all we're trying to do. So the first thing that we're trying to do is to clean your system. When you clean a system, you help organize it. So where we come in from an AI perspective is the ability for us to then proactively keep it organized and keep it clean. For example, deduplication. Now, 17 versions of a document from 17 years ago to have no place in your file or your content system. Okay. A knowledge base article that has been sitting, or a set of articles that have been sitting around that nobody has accessed, by the way. They've literally been sitting around for ages, have no place in your system. Okay. So we are focusing on the foundational piece. We're a 6-month-old company. We raised a $6 million seed round last year, led by Preface Ventures, participation from Bridge Ventures, Moment, High Sage, Rain Capital, and Foster VC, and Transform VC. Our goal was very simple. We said CIOs need to have trust in their data. They need to go to their executive partners, their CMO, their chief legal officer, the CRO, and say, you can run much more automation. You can drive more AI projects than ever before because your data is in a much better set than it is before. The harsh reality is people have not cleaned up data for a long time because it's very hard. In the introduction that you made was very apt. It's very boring. I'm very boring, dude. Like, trust me, it's totally fine by me. But the reality is, it's a huge market and it's a huge problem. And so, all we think we need to do is to start this change management, this behavior. I need to. It's a newsflash for some of your listeners. Let me put this: the cloud is actually built on hardware. There's literally storage and data centers everywhere. And
mm,
this needs to be backed up and stored. So Muzamil, when you were talking about earlier about your like Apple cloud, that wasn't there several years ago. The reason that was there now is because companies like Apple and Google are managing hundreds of exabytes of our photos and our videos in a visual first generation. And they need to keep it, retain it, back it up, and archive it. And I can tell you for a fact that data centers aren't being fast enough. I've been hearing that we're thinking about building data centers in space. Someone needs to pay for that cost. And so
Mhm.
my viewpoint is that if you are running an AI project as an enterprise, you need to be able to be conscious of token costs. Token costs can be reduced by reducing the level of garbage that goes in. You should have a cleaner infrastructure by making sure that the stuff that is not there, not necessary, should no longer be there.
Mm.
There's no excuse for it. The people who say I may need it one day, I'm totally fine with those people. But unfortunately, it's been 10 years. So I'm not sure what one day you're waiting for. Is that the day you retire and say, I may need it that day? I don't know. So the point I'm basically making is like, if order for AI to be successful in a number of, there are a number of things that need to be done right. Data is one of those. I think it's a huge opportunity to be able to have a cleaner, unstructured data set that could be maintained clean, which improves the level of trust for executive leaders to say, we would like to drive more process. We would like to make sure that this can be driven by AI, and we could train it. We could make sure that it's inferred and processing the stuff that we trust. That's the way to think about it. Does it make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I'm curious though about the economics of your business right now. And what I mean by that is there are there are multiple ways to sell a product, particularly in today's day and age. I would argue that a lot of consumer, and I know that you're focused on enterprise. I'll come to that just in just a moment. But a lot of consumer products right now have a lot of valuation and a lot of revenue, largely because there is a FOMO in the market, and a lot of people are there right now because they're just worried that if they're not, they're going to lose out on something. And I think a lot of these companies are going to get hit by the bubble bursting, because once the FOMO passes, and I would argue normally when the bubble bursts, it's not just FOMO going back to normal, it actually goes the other way, where the same folks who are FOMOing become extremely harsh and say, this is all terrible, we're never going to come back to this again. And that's the tough part, where if unless you have some economics baked into the system, you're not
Mhm.
going to be able to survive. Um,
Yeah.
and so, what I mean in terms of enterprises, whatever you're selling, whatever the cost of that selling is that amount less than the efficiency gain or the cost saved? And if that is less, then it's baked into the economics, because it doesn't matter about what the narrative is. It doesn't matter about the bubble. All that matters is today or post crash, I go in and I say, you're already spending $200. Let me take $100 and save you $100 every month. It's a no brainer, right? Run me through the economics for the customers here in terms of
Sure.
what you cost, integrating you into any enterprise solution.
Okay. So, but first and foremost is, again, we operate in three particular areas. We can have some hard ROI in a couple of them, and much more sort of project based that you'll see in a much more longer term. So let's start on the hard stuff. It you know if you think about token costs as a general rule, right? Just let's just do some basics of it. If you have to process 100, let's just say 100,000 documents and articles,
Mm.
that ultimately the token cost for 100,000 articles of processing is vastly different than processing 70,000 articles or 30,000, right? So you have to think, our improvement is improving RAG, number one, and reducing the level of compute and processing and token costs that you would typically have to do, right? That is just very clear from our standpoint and what we're basically seeing from folks. So that's one. The second is much more downstream, but the outcome based, right? So think of it from an outcome base. If you feed it incorrect, like here's the thing that we need to sort of get people to wake up to much more, right? Bad data resulted in sort of bad outputs. But with AI, what's happened is it basically gives you can literally come up with really bad outputs more of the time simply because of your ability to direct it in the way you can. I could go into ChatGPT and ask it to give me the linkage of how you, Muzamil, have caused the financial crisis of 2008, and it will give me an answer, right? It won't say, by the way, it doesn't have context. It will actually give me that answer, right? So my point is that that is definitively part of troubling and fixing that is a data problem. It's not all of it, but there is a data problem that feeds into that. And so the other thing is LLMs are very good for everything that's outside of your firewall. It's out in the public domain, but it doesn't understand the nature of what we are building internally. Now, some of it's available on Reddit and our support blog, etc. But a company's taxonomy and its language, it's native to its company. That's how it's understood, right? So, you have to get accurate, and you have to understand that the experience of getting an AI project done well, it's unforgiving if it goes badly. Now, the third piece is a more simple piece. So you mentioned this earlier on, right? For Apple storage, okay?
Mm.
So right now, if you have to upgrade or pay more every month, you would say, okay, that's annoying. But if you only had to do it once a year, that's not the worst thing in the world, is it? So storage expansion, because just from a basic infrastructure perspective, the ROI for us is very simple, right? If you think of it from a big picture standpoint, think about the objections that people and communities are raising about data centers being built in those areas, right? So
Mm.
let's just look at this on a foundational level. Data exploding, more infrastructure is required to store that data. And you can argue the storage technology and the infrastructure technology is getting better. You can compress it. But dude, compressing 15 million articles is still compressing 15 million articles. Okay. Whether it's here or in space, it's still 15 million articles of crap. That's the bottom line. Okay. So
And
the way
just
to
to
think
just
about
to add
this,
context, we were
yeah,
already seeing that in RAM as well in terms of the prices,
right.
where the
Well, so
bottleneck is actually the
quadruple.
molecules,
Yeah,
right? It's not, yeah.
right. So quadrupling of NAND
Mm.
storage on
Mm.
like so keep telling me storage is cheap. Storage may be cheap from a commodity standpoint. It's not cheap to manage and secure and comply and archive and process, right? So just from that standpoint, from an infrastructure standpoint, when you have scarcity in terms of infrastructure, data centers are not being fast enough. Number one, storage, NAND chips quadrupling in price. And then in your data center, if you're a CIO on-prem healthcare, financial services, a lot of the world still runs on-prem for as most people have to realize. You have to now reserve space in your infrastructure for NVIDIA GPUs, which used to be the case when you didn't have an AI project, you just put in more storage.
Mm.
So now, if you were constrained for resources, time, and space, or otherwise, what are you going to do? I mean, can you just simply say, we're going to just add more storage? Good luck. I don't think it's a good practice. So I think somewhere down the line, we have to come to a conclusion which says, nearly 4 years post ChatGPT, we are not seeing the level of ROI that we should be expecting from this transformational technology. I'm not saying there isn't any. I'm saying there isn't enough. There should be, and from a CIO perspective. So that's the genesis of how I thought about it from an enterprise use case. Having been a CIO of multiple companies, if you wanted to roll out successfully AI internally, you would run into that problem. You would not have an engineering problem. You would not have an LLM problem because that's been provided to you. You would not have an imagination or process or work. You could all design this. You can design all the products you want, but it has to be fed on your data. And if your data is not clean, I'm sorry, it just will not succeed in the longer term. I just know that I've seen this too many times.
Mm. That makes sense. I'm gonna divide this now into two parts, right? So there is a world of startups and tech-enabled, tech-first, enterprises. Then there is a world of corporate America. Um,
Mhm.
and this is something I experienced last year when I originally came to the US. I actually took a trip around and about. I went to New York, I went to San Francisco, Seattle, Dallas. Really, some of these major hubs, trying to see the narrative and the vibe and the feeling. I'll be honest. I feel like San Francisco right now, which where you're based, is living in a different dimension, completely disconnected from
It's a
reality.
different world. It's a different world.
And
It's a different world.
and I feel like, and when I was in San Francisco particularly, I think a lot of people I met, while I could see the future there, 100%, no doubt about it, but I also felt like they're feeding each other so much of that Kool-Aid of what's happening in Silicon Valley, and where everybody is so knee deep into this whole revolution, that they're not realizing, honestly, if I'm in Atlanta, even in New York, corporate America is just still living their best life, not really doing much
No,
about any of this.
I think it's a, I want to stop you
And
and correct for a second. I think
yeah,
it's important. You're absolutely right, but this itself is a bubble. Okay, I traveled to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Chicago, Illinois, New York, Boston, Charlotte, North Carolina, Dallas, Texas, and otherwise. So it is the age of transformation. It is the age of AI, but entire industries, some are much further ahead, and I see this across the US. But yes, the capital structure is largely based here.
yeah.
A
So
large
my
part of, as a result of that, has morphed into it, right? So that's the way to
100%.
think
So
about it.
so
Yeah, yeah,
my thesis then became, as I went across, um, I think San Francisco is running faster than the rest of the lot. I think a lot of the rest of the lot are running slower than they usually run, because there's also that, how would you put it, that inertia, right? So your initial response when you're so disconnected from it is that to dismiss it and to say, this is not happening. Close your eyes,
yeah.
put your head on the ground. And I was hearing a lot of that, from people in corporate America, where, and I could tell the reason why that was happening was underlying. There was this friction, there was this tension, where they were reading a lot about joblessness, and they actually felt like, you let's say you meet a startup kid in San Francisco. He's generally working 16 hours and he's genuinely working left, right, and center. And then you meet someone in corporate America. Let's be real. Beyond the meetings that they're doing, it's actual productive value of like 3 hours, and then there's a ton of busy work, right?
Mm.
That's what AI hits immediately. And so
Yeah.
obviously there is this defensive anti-AI sentiment in corporate America. Now, in that context, what I wanted to sort of ask you was, I get the startups, I get that, and they're also fairly unstructured. They're tech first, they do a bunch of these things, but there's a trillions of dollars of value in corporate America in making corporate America itself efficient as an engine, as this sort of extreme behemoth. A lot
Yeah.
of this is also, again, coming from the background that I was from, the snowflakes of the world, the Teradata's of the world. It was largely structured, cleaned, processed data, on top of which was these entire enterprises were built. Now, a lot of these enterprises are fairly new to unstructured data, where they're again building out new tentacles and just rapidly gathering a bunch of things and thinking, okay, we'll decide what we do with this later, because they're not built in that sort of startup-y, chaotic model. I'm curious, when you differentiate between, let's say, the startups of Silicon Valley versus these high value, comparatively slower, more defensive enterprise companies, how different is that in terms of the value that you're offering, and in terms of the uptake that you might imagine them to have over the next 5 years?
For us, we don't see a tremendous amount of difference, to be honest with you, because ultimately we're starting at the foundational level. So I think that's one piece. As a general rule for AI startups overall, what I would say, I I think it's still too early to have anything definitive, Muzamil. If I'm
Mm,
honest, there's no patterns in this business anymore. If I'm, I see this. I used to think, well, okay, this is going in this direction, so it will then go to this level. You know, all of a sudden, some of the biggest tech companies are having layoffs. Why are they having layoffs? It's become trillion-dollar companies. I don't understand. Like literally out of the blue, you see this. Companies who said would never have layoffs, all of a sudden
mm,
start having layoffs. Level of mergers and acquisitions happening. So, unfortunately, the reason I can't answer the question directly is just the patterns are just not there. I just haven't seen it. I
mm,
see all flavors. I've seen company today got acquired after only 18 months. Uh, and I saw that company and founder wish him well and success. I've seen other companies who've raised several $100 million revenue, at risk, at don't know what to say. So
Mm,
the impact of AI in some of these industries, some of it's been inflated, some of it's very real. Some of it has, and some of it comes down to the fact that you've got two very, very large companies who are dominating a consequential technology like LLM
mm,
in Anthropic and OpenAI, and their ability and to distribute and innovate on a new product offering, which could completely disseminate and just completely have existential risk on a company that's been around for several years. I mean, that's real. That
mm.
is real. And so that's considered. So that's what's typically happening. So it's very difficult to say, well, is the ROI, is it different? It's because I just think it's still too early to discover that. And I think it's moving too fast. So that's the way I would look at it.
Mm. One last question, then we're going to sort of wrap it
Yeah.
up as well. Again, I mentioned earlier the Palantir CEO talking about sovereign AI for particularly for enterprise.
Yeah.
Satya from Microsoft came out with a very interesting essay recently where he said, we can't have a world where frontier model companies basically absorb everybody. We need
Hmm.
a world where we have shared prosperity of sorts. It's very
Yeah.
Chinese
Yeah.
of him.
Yeah. Yeah.
But inherently, what he was saying was, you stay in your lane and enable everybody else to be able to generate that value and distribute it accordingly, right? Um, what's your view on the way that you just mentioned earlier about these two companies that are beginning to absorb everything, seemingly?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so there's always that question for every startup founder, even, is what I'm doing even worth it? Because if I
Such
can
a
do
good
it,
question.
there
It's
is
such a good
someone in
question.
Anthropic
Yeah.
who has
Oh
infinite
my
tokens,
God.
has loops, engineering agents, engineering products.
Welcome to the startup world. So I'll answer very quick. I will be respectful of your time as well. So I think two things. One is I think there's going to be more data regulation and there's going to be more data enforcement at the sovereign level than ever before. I think larger companies can pay $1 billion fine without thinking twice. It's a rounding error. I think that being affected to companies, the large majority of companies, is going to be a real problem. And I think because data is now not just an asset for companies, it is a national asset, and it will be protected by sovereign nations. And I totally understand. So sovereign clouds, neo clouds, I see that happening and morphing more and more. On to the other more fundamental question. Welcome to the day in the life of startup founder. Some days the highs are high. You think you can change the world. The lows are like, what was I thinking? What the hell was I? Why did I do this? Basically, my advice to founders: go understand that it is a big market and go after a big market. Number two, frustration, motivation is a very good catalyst if you want to build a company. For me, this was the frustration. I've frustrated this problem for 15 freaking years. I need to solve this. Okay. It's a nice way to basically go after it. Can Anthropic build a good product? I wish them nothing but success. But that is not their focus. So this has been around for a long time. I've seen companies that tried to build a competing solution with companies that were hosting on their actual platforms. AWS had been notorious for this. Microsoft less so, but AWS had this where you have companies that are running on AWS and AWS have a competing product. Some focus on it, some don't. That is just the nature of the industry. So I think there's still a huge room for opportunity, but it is a foot race. You've got to execute, you've got to focus, you've got to drive further forward. And I think that's what differentiates a business irrespective of the idea. No question. Second, build a great customer experience and they'll stay with you. No question in my mind. So ultimately, serving customers, demonstrating value, which is what we'd like to try and do and be very clear about that, is something that I think that has huge value. And I think that's what will drive companies to be successful in the longer term.
Mm. Can you give me a sense of where you think all of this is going to go in the next 12 months? And then connected to that, I'd love to get a sense of who, in your opinion, are the three most exciting startups, probably not the more popular ones, but
Yeah.
really doing interesting work that one should be looking out at.
The reason I can't answer that question, and I say this with respect to someone, is I'm just 110% focused in what I'm basically building. And so I wish a lot of my startup founder companies lots of success. If I select three, I'm going to get offended by another 30. So I just want to be respectful of my community that I'm in. And I do have a large founder community, so I'll be respectful of that. But I do think that we're going to see three potentially $1 trillion IPOs this year. I mean, I think that's a very exciting time for the industry. I was interesting to see how the market absorbs that. I think the level of innovation is going to be I think mergers and acquisitions are going to definitely increasing more than ever before. Um, and I think the SaaSpocalypse thing, I think, was completely overhyped, and I don't think that was really a thing that distracted me. I think it was a distraction. So we'll probably see more distractions similar to that. But the harsh reality is, and I'll just tell you right now, there's lots of companies that still run on IBM mainframes. There's lots of insurance companies that still have lots of fax machines. There's lots of, it takes a long time to dramatically change. Now, those markets are not growing, those products are not growing. I totally understand that. But change takes time. And just, it's important to remember that.
Makes a lot of sense. Yusuf, thank you so much for taking the time out and sharing all that insight. I'm excited for the product that you're building, and I'm curious how that sort of is able to reduce the amount of slop that everybody seems to hate, courtesy
Yes.
of making sure that the
You've just
foundation
done
layer
the
is clean
you've
enough.
just done BDR pitch, reduce the number of volume of slop. So we'll give you some commission on that one alone. Thanks very much, Simba. Really great to have really be here.
Likewise, and thank you so much for all of you guys. Let me know in the comment section below, when you're building AI systems, how do you deal with unstructured data? Do you think that is a problem? If you're part of an enterprise, how much of useless, redundant data do you guys have to deal with? And do you think that can make a huge impact in the way that we deal with AI in enterprise? But nonetheless, this was Sayed Muzamil and Zedi. You are watching Beyond the Bubble podcast, powered by Noodle Seed Studios. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.